Thank Jah. It's Friday. Welcome, Sipsters, to Sip episode 72. 72, and I already see a whole bunch of people in the chat room. And by the way, you know how this begins. Famous Chicago Bears numbered 72. There is only one. So if you would like to put that answer into the chat, that would be great. David Young, Debbie Long, Hans and Caitlin Greasy, Jan Kiefer, Ivy, Jim Brubaker from Colorado, Julie Fogarty from Chicago, Karen Athanas, who has won the last two poll questions and has bankrolled a small fortune. We'll get to that later. There is no IRS declaration for that, Karen. You're safe. Catherine Jurica, Laurel Robinson, Les Eal, Lori Putney, Marge Leeds, Mark Shalinor. Everybody is looking good this evening, and we have got a fantastic evening for you. And it begins with a special announcement. Now, this is actually something that is near and dear to us because you know a portion of every single one of your wine clubs, every single one of your purchases on the Cellar Angels Marketplace generates proceeds to a charity. And right now, sadly enough, there are children in hospitals all over the United States that are scared, are afraid, are lonely. And there is a group that we have now partnered with that actually is dedicated to bringing them smiles. And it is a group of professional entertainers, many of them Vegas Strip headliners, that volunteer their time to go into children's hospitals free and perform all sorts of magic acts, all sorts of musical acts, all sorts of things just to bring them smiles. So I really want to thank the group over at Win-Win Entertainment. They are our newest charity partner. They are incredible. And we're proud to be able to share them with you this evening. This agreement was just signed this week, so we're very excited about that. And while I have you, for those of you that have made it 70 some odd 2 weeks in a row, cheers to you. We're thrilled everyone is still with us and the audience is growing. So anybody, I'm looking for the chat, anybody actually get the most famous, David Young, David Young is in the audience. Oh, look at Marge Leeds. Yep, she has that one nailed. This young small fry, the fridge, William Perry, famous Chicago Bear number 72. Please get Marge's address so we can send her a thank you gift. We don't have actually thank you gifts. That was just pretty impressive on the first guest. All right, speaking of guests, let's go with who we have this evening. This is a person that is near and dear to the Cellar Angels crew, because of the passion, the dedication, the perseverance. Some would question the intelligence of pursuing such an insane passion of Rhone wines. But actually the production and the gift that he has in this is incredible. We are thrilled to welcome back and discuss an amazing wine that you're gonna wanna have in your glass. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Law from MacLaren Wines. Cheers, Steve.
Thank you, cheers. Little Aida Viognier.
Aida Viognier. And it's funny because we don't drink enough Viognier. And part of the problem is that it's extremely hard to grow, or was at one point in time. It was very thinly planted. For those of you that this might have been your first time to Cellar Angels, or you stopped ordering wines, keep in mind, many of us are drinking this wine because of the sip kit. And so Steve's wine has been in the sip kit, which is on the Cellar Angels website, along with several other wines. So you go to the Cellar Angels website, you go to shop, you go to wine, and the sip kit is going to be the first thing you see. So now this is a handy dandy little thing to have for the next 4 or 5 Fridays, because you order this and all the wines that you see here are going to be delivered directly to your door. You get to pick a charity. We donate proceeds to that charity. And then you can taste along with the winemaker or vintner, like we're going to do this evening with Steve. We're tasting Aida Viognier, and we're going to discuss this Viognier in particular, but also Steve's incredible portfolio, because it's nothing short of extraordinary. And I wouldn't look for it in any stores because you're not going to find it. So Viognier, Steve, why Viognier?
I love it.
And when did you fall in love with it?
It was in my time when I was living in France. So I moved from Scotland, because obviously this is a French accent. I moved from Scotland to France for a tech job. I was working in tech, and I got I was working for HP down in the Rhone area, and I fell in love with Syrah, which is my number one love. And then I discovered Viognier, and I just fell in love with it.
So seriously, you had an HP job and you were in the Rhone. Yeah, if I had a job like that, I would be in Topeka, Kansas, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Nothing against Topeka or Cedar Rapids, but was it tech servicing? Was it tech code writing? How does HP have an outlet in the Rhone?
So this kind of dates me, unfortunately, Martin, but this was back in the day when the HP were still building PCs in France. Remember what a PC is? I don't know if you remember what a PC is.
I do.
Personal computer. Yes.
Unfortunately,
and, they used to build them.
Oh, they had a physical building constructing PCs in France in the Rhone.
Yes. Unbelievable. And so I went, because I did my thesis with HP when I was in Scotland, but then I moved to France to go work for a different company. And then I moved down to the Rhone, and I was in their procurement department buying hard disk drives. I don't know if anybody remembers what a hard disk drive is. Most people use solid state nowadays, but it's actually this rotating disk in your PC.
Very familiar with it. It was the small flat disk as opposed to the 3 1/4 inch square floppies.
Yes, I remember the 5 1/4 inch. And the first hard disk drive I worked on was a 20 megabyte. And I remember because I was part of the procurement team, and we had to, one time we had to stand up in front of the CEO of HP in France and explain to him that we thought that people would need more than 100 megabytes of data storage in their personal computers. And he told us to leave the room. We were talking nonsense.
What year was this?
Oh, what would that be? 1995, 95, 96?
That's not that long ago, and that's hysterical because you told them that they were going to need more than 100 megabits, which is essentially about 20 pictures.
Yeah.
And right now you have 1,000 on your phone, and he said you guys were crazy.
Totally. Nobody would want more than 100 megabytes on a single spindle. It was just absolute lunacy. Lunacy, I think, was the word. Maybe he said it with a French accent, but it was something similar.
So you left the room, went out to the vineyards, and just went tasting. What else are you going to do with the day?
Well, yeah, it was actually funny because coming from Scotland, I thought wine came out of a box. So basically, when I moved to France, I made French friends, and because I was on my own, and they were all into wine, and so we would always, listen, every weekend, but a lot of weekends, we'd dive into somebody's car and we'd take off to Champagne or Chablis or Loire or further afield on the summer holidays. We'd go down the Rhone. And that's when I discovered Syrah, and that was it. It was like, oh, wow, what is this? And then very quickly thereafter, it was Viognier time.
And I'm glad that you stumbled upon Viognier because this is our first in a 3-part educational series. And tonight we're going to be talking about acidity, aromatics, and actually food pairing of acidity with certain foods. And one thing from an aromatic standpoint with Viognier, it is actually considered, obviously, with Riesling, a few others, one of the aromatic varietals. And so this, you will get, depending upon the temperature of specifically Steve's Viognier, you're going to get all sorts of just an amazing, if you like flowers, and I don't mean the brand, I mean flowers. If you like fruit, white peach, honeysuckle, there's just tangerine, tropical notes, and that sort of thing. And then you'll also have the floral notes. Viognier has been described as a consumer's romance fantasy and a winemaker's nightmare. Why is it the winemaker's nightmare?
It's a finicky grape. It's a wee bit finicky in terms of where to grow it. I think the big misconception with Viognier too is that it's very difficult to find, as you've alluded to earlier. It's very difficult to find Viognier. And I know that for this vineyard here, for me, I love the Northern Rhone style, that style that you mentioned earlier, and that's the style I like to drink. And so I was trying to find a vineyard where I could replicate more of those types of conditions. And so I'm looking for a place that's relatively cool. There's very little Viognier planted in Northern California, but where they did tend to plant it, it was in the warmer areas. And so, Lodi, Livermore Valley, Paso Robles, you're going to get little smatterings of Viognier there because they're quite Rhone orientated too. But the style of wine that you can make from those types of environments is very, very different than the style that I was wanting to make, which replicated more that Northern Rhone style, because if you think about it, the big difference between where we are in California and the Northern Rhone is basically its latitude. They're just much further north. So they get much less sun than we get here. And so the sun really affects and really changes the physiological ripening in the fruit, but also the flavor profiles that you get in the fruit as well. And so the things that you just mentioned as you went through there, when you were tasting the wine and you were saying floral elements, they come from the higher phenolics in the wine. So they come from the prettier notes that you're going to get in the wine. If you get a Viognier from a warmer area, the sun will bake those flavors out of the wine. And so trying to find a location where I could be true to the style that I like, literally this vineyard took me 9 years to find.
Okay, pause right there for a second, because I don't know if I'd look for a golf course for 9 years, and I'm a diehard golfer. But getting back to the floral notes, it's amazing because there is, and it's not, it's floral without being perfumey that is off-putting, but it is floral with a clean notes of, like I said, honeysuckle, mango, tangerine, just a beautiful bouquet. And so you're telling us that comes from the phenolics that actually is related to the temperature in the region, because if it's too warm, it'll get baked out.
That's my absolute belief in terms of how this is. The Viogniers I tend to taste from the warmer areas in Northern California, they tend to have the same flavor profile from a fruit perspective that you just mentioned, peach, apricot, those different flavors that you're going to get in there. But very, very few have the higher, prettier notes. The more feminine, the prettier notes. And that's, for me, that is the sign of a cool climate style of Viognier. And the style I love is Viognier has to be pretty. It should never be overbearing. It should never be overpowering. It's a fantastic food wine. If you get it in that right area where you can maintain the nice balance across the flavors, you've got the fruit's still here. You've got tons of fruit in that glass, but it's also balanced with that lovely floral element that you're getting. You're also getting a little bit of pear, and pear is a white stone fruit. It's not the orange or the yellow stone fruit. So it's got that lovely range that you want when you're pairing it with foods, and that for me is the key part.
And it's interesting because you talked about the pear, and it has a little bit of a linear delineation. It's not by any means, it's not flabby. It has great depth and balance and acidity, but also it's a medium bodied wine. So you just get this wonderful mouthfeel with it. And it's such a refreshing wine. And I encourage everybody, when you are out at restaurants and stuff, you can very easily find an $80, $90 bottle of Chardonnay on the menu. Chances are, if you can find a $30, $40, $50 Viognier on the menu, you will do well in that capacity, especially if it's from a cooler climate. So now you're after a specific style of Viognier in the glass, and you believe it comes from a vineyard source. And so you spent 9 years looking for that source. What were you specifically looking for?
I was applying the same theory, Martin, that I applied to my Syrah many, many years ago when I started my label, which was to find what they call around cool climate. And so it was my eureka moment, I guess, which was in 2007 when I first made my very first Syrah, and I made it from Dry Creek in Sonoma County here. And I realized when I made it, it was from the Unti vineyard, which was lovely people to work with, very, very helpful and very professional, and they gave me my start. And so I'm forever thankful for them. And I realized that I was not going to make the style of wine I wanted to drink from that type of environment. It was just too hot. There was too much sun. And so that's when I started realizing I need to find somewhere cooler. And I'm stuck here in California. I'm not going to move to Oregon or Washington or somewhere else. So I decided that, or I realized that I needed to find sea fog. And that was the sea fog coming in off the ocean, coming in off the Pacific, does it every single day. In the summertime, it comes in every single day. And that's what I started looking for with my Syrahs. It took me many years to find the right Syrah vineyards for me, but because the main area that has that coastal influence, that fog influence, is Russian River. And Russian River is mostly planted, for reasons I'm sure all of your listeners know, it's very, very famous for Pinot. And so everybody and their dog wants to make a Pinot, and so everybody and their dog wants to plant Pinot because they know they can sell it. And so trying to find a Syrah vineyard in amongst that is very, very difficult, but trying to find a Viognier vineyard in Russian River, it took 9 years.
That's incredible. And I'm going to ask the first poll question because we talked a little bit about this early on as far as it wasn't widely planted in California, but it's interesting if you go back a few years, speaking of the 85 Bears, but if you go back to 1986, and those of you that are new, this is where all the money gets pooled and then the winner take all. And so the pot rolled over last week. So now you have a chance. In 1986, there were how many acres of Viognier left in the world? I see a lot of late money coming in from the West Coast. We're going to give this 5, 4, 4, 3 1/4, 2, 1. And before I share the results, did you ever consider going like as far out to the coast, Bodega Bay area or anything out there?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so few vineyards out there. I mean, it's just a question of, who's planting what. I mean, out by Sonoma Coast area, the Appalachian AVA, that's starting to come out more Sonoma Coast, Fort Ross area, they're really focusing 100% on Pinot. Might get a little bit of Chardonnay out there, but really the majority of the focus out there is 100% Pinot. I just said, it took me 9 years to find a Viognier vineyard in Russian River. If I was looking in Sonoma Coast, I think I'd still be looking.
That's a good point. All right, so here's the answer. In 1986, there were 80 acres of Viognier in the world. And the grape was almost extinct, which is incredible. And when you think about 80 acres is not that much. I grew up on a farm that was 60. So it's amazing that 80 acres left in the world is all it is. Thankfully, it's had a resurgence and people have found it's now grown all over. In fact, Virginia, Southern California, South Africa, Australia, and really in a lot of different places. So it's growing, which very, very excited about that. So 9 years to find a vineyard, and the aromatics basically come through on the cool temperature, but it also, when you talk about a finicky grape, it has a longer hang time to develop all of this. And so it is, like we say, it's kind of winemaking on a razor's edge because you want to pick it. You have to wait. I mean, how do you balance all of that?
You have to work with very good farmers. I mean, that's the trick. And this vineyard is owned by the Duttons. They're fantastic farmers. They've been in that area, Green Valley, Russian River, for many, many years. We worked closely together. This vineyard has been farmed for Viognier for some time. A good friend of mine was making the Viognier from this little vineyard. And when I say vineyard, I'm being very, very gracious. This vineyard that I'm talking about is part of a much larger vineyard. The much larger vineyard is mostly, the whole entire vineyard, I think, is 23, 24 acres in total. The vast majority of it is planted to Pinot. There's about 4 acres of Syrah, and on the very cap of the hill, there is 0.7 acres planted of Viognier. So when I say vineyard, I mean basically your tomato garden is probably bigger than that now.
Yeah, it's 20 rows of Viognier.
Yeah. So the yields tend to be quite low on Viognier. You're not going to get the same yields as you get with Chardonnay, with Sauvignon Blanc for sure. The yields are much, much lower. It's a little bit more finicky in terms of, as you mentioned, you're waiting on that flavor pop towards the end, just as the flavor pop coming. You're not wanting the sugar to get too high, so you can pick it. And so you're trying to look for these cooler areas where it's going to keep the vineyard a little bit cooler. But then you've got a little bit of moisture issues. They are very tight clusters, very similar to Pinot, also like Zinfandel. So you are concerned about rot in terms of any kind of moisture getting into the clusters. So that's where the kicker comes with this. But this is an example in this wine that you're tasting. This wine is less than 13% alcohol. I put 13 on the label because you have to do your labels ahead of, it's on the back. It's
I know that. I'm just showing him the label.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you. There you go. The bottom left. I put 13 on the label because I had to do my labels ahead of time. And but this wine is actually 12.7% alcohol. And I'm going to defy you when you taste this wine to think that this wine is a 12.7% alcohol wine. It feels much wider, has much more presence on your palate, much more viscosity. And that comes from two things, really, I think, and that comes to the winemaking part of it. But it's the varietal has a nice viscosity to it for sure. But it's also the fact that I barrel ferment and barrel age this wine, just like they're doing in France, which is much smaller production, but it adds to that texture in the wine as well. So I'm getting texture without alcohol.
No, you definitely are. A couple of things. Hello, Michael Cabral. Hello, Peter Glick. Jim Brubaker wants to let you know that his first hard drive was 4 8K drives. And then Lori is indicating that the CEO of HP had absolutely no vision for what a terabyte might be. And so how did the transition from France to California? How did you get to wine country out of the Rhone?
So it was basically with my job. I was still working in tech, and I came over to work down in San Jose, and I was working down there for many years. I was working in the tech industry, and when I was working down there, I was still friends with a couple of winemakers in the Rhone Valley. I got friends with when I was living in France. I used to go out and help them, and I stayed friends with them. Yves Cuiron, François Viard. I got friends with them, and I used to meet them pretty much every year. They would come over, and because they consult with some of the wineries in Napa and some other places, and so we would always go out for dinner. And they, we would go out for dinner down in the Bay Area, and they described me as a junkyard dog.
Did they mean that with affection and love?
Well, I think it was because they felt that I was always sniffing around. So what's going on? What's going on? What's with the vineyards? What's this? What's that? And they're going, Steve, your passion is no longer in tech. You need to move on, mate.
Ah, okay. I like it.
That was it.
And so we talked about the aromas, and you actually just touched upon the 12.7% alcohol. And one of the great things about food and wine is the alcohol acidity ratio as it relates to the food. So this is very low alcohol in the grand scheme of things, especially coming out of California, where white and red wines are now pushing 14, 15% all day long. So walk us through kind of the relationship between alcohol, acidity, and foods.
So it all comes from the vineyard. And I don't know if your listeners know, but basically the way that a vine ripens, when it has fruit hanging on the vine, it needs sun. So, because the sugar accumulation in the vine, when the vine is holding fruit, is based on photosynthesis. So the more sun means the more sugar accumulation, or the faster the sugar accumulation in the fruit. And it is the sugar that converts to alcohol. So if you look at the whole thing, more sun means more alcohol. Two things happen though as the fruit is ripening. As the fruit ripens on the vine, as the season goes on, sugar continues to accumulate, and so sugar will continue to go up. Acid starts to fall. So the hotter, the more sun that you get, the higher alcohol you're going to get, but the lower acid you're going to get.
Okay.
And so really the balance for me is not something that I'm doing in the vineyard or in the winery. I'm not adding anything to these wines. This wine is even fermented on native yeast. So there's nothing added to this wine. I'm not adding any chemicals. I'm not adding any tartrates, or I'm not adding anything to this. This is how the wine, when you pick it at the vineyard, the balance for me is not really so much where the sugar is, because I know I'm going to get sugars, and I know where I'm going to get my alcohols, but it's more as soon as the flavors hit, I'm looking for the acid. I want to pick it before my acid disappears, because as I mentioned, as the season goes on, sugar accumulates, but acid disappears. And so you're looking for that sweet spot where you have the flavors, you have the acid, and you have the sugar. Not necessarily when you're in a cool climate, that acid, you want to pick it, it's actually declining quite slowly. So you can actually kind of get your alcohols. You can pick your fruit at a nice time. But as I mentioned with this wine here, this is only 12.7% alcohol. So it shows that even though it was a relatively late pick, it was in, what was this? This was 2020. So that would be into the middle of August when I picked this, the second half of August. It was the third week, I think. So it's relatively late for a white, but the acid in this wine has been maintained, and that's because of the cooler environment that this wine is in. So it's nice. And that's where you get the balance for me.
No, and it's interesting. Steve has mentioned Green Valley, and we're going to pull that up on Google Earth here in a second. But for many cellar angels know, one of our favorite sparkling producers is Iron Horse, and they're a stone's throw away from this vineyard. So right there in Green Valley, and they sought that particular area for sparkling wine production, specifically Chardonnay, because Chardonnay does like that cooler climate area. So that's fascinating that it can be so dependent on that, and the alcohol. Higher alcohol produces less acid, makes it less food friendly. So as we get into the foods, what are you thinking about with this at 12.7% alcohol? And would you call this medium acidic, low acidic, high acidic?
I would say it's medium. I
think so too.
It's not high acidity like wine like you would get like a Sauvignon Blanc.
Exactly.
Even like a Chablis, a Chardonnay from Chablis, where you're having a much higher acidity. And if you think about why you're getting a much higher acidity from Chablis, look at a map. Chablis is one of the most northerly regions in the whole of France where they grow fruit for wine. So it's getting the least amount of sun in the whole of Burgundy. It's higher than Beaune. Right. And so it's getting much less sun. So you're getting less ripeness, less sugar. You're maintaining your acid too. So you're able to pick those wines. So that's why those wines have a tendency to have that wet stone fruit, that nice kind of that razor sharp. It's nice, a nice acidity to it. So this is more of a medium acidity. And I think people always kind of get concerned when you talk about acidity in wine, but what you have to realize too is, I think the whole point, and we were talking about this yesterday, Martin, is food has acidity. Mm-hmm. Right? And so when you have a wine with acidity, what you're really trying to do when you pair is you're trying to look for wine and food that have similar acidities, so you can actually pair those acidities, because it's the acidity in the wine that will pull the flavor to the back of your palate. And I don't know if you've ever had the experience, I know I have, when you're in a restaurant, you're having some food, you eat the food, you taste the food, you swallow the food, you have a sip of wine, you have a flash of flavor up front with the wine, and then you don't taste it in the middle of your palate, and you don't taste it at the end of your palate. And the reason for that is that your food acidity was actually higher than your wine acidity. It's the wine acidity that drags the flavor to the back. And so that's what's key for me.
No, I like it. All right, we're going to do our second or our last poll question. And before I do that, there were several correct answers on Monday's trivia email question. And that is actually, by the way, a speed answer. So it's the fastest one in. Number one answer and first correct answer was from Nick Schramm. Is Nick on tonight? I know there might have been a conflict. Doug Rutherford was second. Karen, you are actually third. Nick is not on, which is a shame. Winner has to be present. So that $5,000 award will go back to the house, which is a shame. But Karen was third. So Karen is on fire lately. Let's go with the next poll question. The birthplace of Viognier.
Wait, can you say what the answer is on the poll question?
The poll question, or the email answer, was Alsace. For those of you that read the email, Karen got it. Karen could have shared with everyone. The birthplace of Viognier is from what country? Now, you know I like to be a little tricky. Mission Control said provocative. I don't think provocative was called for, but that's fine. All right. Interestingly enough, we have a tie. So one tie, all tie, as far as the money is concerned. So again, no one will win the money this week, so it will roll over. The correct answer is what, Steve Law?
France.
That is correct. And extra credit, if anybody wants to throw in the chat, what region in France besides the Rhone?
I know this. I know this.
It begins with a C and it's not Cadbury for chocolate. All right, let's, some do believe it was originated in Croatia, so I don't know about that. I know there is, of course, a papal Catholic influence with regards to a bishop of some sort that apparently brought these clones in to France. So it depends on which story you want to believe. The correct region, Debbie Long, is actually Coindreau, or how would you like to pronounce it? Because Steve's got a much better French pronunciation than I do.
Condrieu.
It's exactly what I said. Did anybody hear any difference there? It was literally like an echo. It was. Thank you, Debbie.
Like Peter Sellers. Do you have a licence for my minke?
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's take a look at where this vineyard is, or these vineyards. Why? Oh, and oh, by the way, okay, if you would like to turn on your cameras, Mission Control is informing me that now is the time to do that. So we're going to make that option available. Lori, 2 for 2 again, big money, big bucks, no whammies, as we used to say, because there were no wild cards on that. Lori's on fire. And it is the honor system, folks. So you just can't say you got them both correct, because we probably have some software audit that we can figure out who actually got them correct. So let's go take a look at these vineyards, because it's crazy. So the thing that's interesting to me is Steve talked about the coolness that Viognier loves, and that coolness in the Rhone comes from the Rhone River, and also its latitude and longitude position and where it is. The coolness from Napa and Sonoma, and this is Napa County, this is Sonoma County. A lot of that coolness, one, comes from the San Pablo Bay, which is why this down here is very intense and rich Pinot Noir and Chardonnay country. But Steve specifically mentioned, and I love it, that he had to actually go to the coast to look for fog. So you don't actually find that too often with someone saying, I need to find some fog. There's Karen, the big money winner. The Grigori Vineyard is the Dutton family, and they are fantastic farmers, as you mentioned. But let's take a look at just how far away this is, and or from where Steve's tasting area is. So I'll actually pull out. So Steve, you can describe, because as you mentioned, this is a fairly large vineyard blocks plural. And this, whatever this is like 12 rows of Viognier?
There are 14 rows of Viognier, and it's 0.7 acres. So you see that where you have your yellow pin, that is the Viognier block. It's actually Gravenstein apples to the south that you're seeing there on those trees. That's the Gravenstein apples. And my dog Cooper loves to grab one whenever he's out there. He loves chewing on an apple. And then to the north of the yellow pin, you have that's where my Syrah block is. So the Syrah block is just there, and it's a total of 36 rows. So it goes almost up to that. I don't know if you can see halfway up that block. That is roughly where the Syrah ends. And then after that, all the way to the end of the road there, then it's Pinot. And then the whole entire block on the other side of that access road that's running to the east side is all Pinot as well. So the vast majority of that vineyard is Pinot. And
it's great that it's Dutton family, and there's many producers that source from Dutton family vineyards, including their own wine. But you've got Demal, you have, I mean, just there's so many that source fruit from this vineyard blocks, from these blocks, because of the way the Dutton family farms. And they've been doing it for 70 some odd years, I think, at last count or longer. But it's amazing when you think about how small this is, and just a tiny amount. And you mentioned it was planted to Viognier prior, to your purchasing the fruit. So did that person just have a passion for Viognier as well?
So you mentioned him, so he's a good friend of mine, and I'll give him a plug. But Andy Smith, who's the winemaker and owner at Dumal, is a good friend of mine. He's another Scottish winemaker, and so we have our own individual club, our secret handshake, the whole thing. And he is the one that actually planted this vineyard originally with the Duttons. So he originally planted the Viognier, and he actually has planted the Syrah as well. And he actually he is working with a few other vineyards, and so he actually I inherited, or I got the vineyard from Andy at Dumal for this Gregory vineyard. So it used to be in his Leah Viognier as well. And he's a dear friend. He makes wonderful wines too.
Very much so. And I just changed the image a little bit so you could just see the proximity to the ocean. So like you said, the fog comes in every day, certain times of the year, and just cools the whole region, which I think would have to present a challenge with getting the ripeness, no? Because if it's not getting the sunlight, or it burns off early enough, or it has enough sunlight for the diurnal days, and it matures slow and ripens consistently.
Yeah, I would say that the fog is burning off here typically about anywhere between 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
So it's getting a good dose of afternoon sun plus half of the morning, essentially. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm never concerned about ripeness out here. I think even for the Syrah, my Syrah ripens just perfectly, and it's definitely getting enough sun. It's not getting quite as much sun, and it's a little bit cooler out there as well. And so everything just is slowed down. So your ripening profiles are much slower than, say, if you were in Central Valley or I don't know, somewhere a lot warmer. It would be a lot faster.
Well, and let's go visit the tasting room. And this is why you don't taste with Steve and then go visit the vineyard and then head back to the tasting room, because there's a good bit of distance here. So what's that drive?
I would say it's probably about 45 minutes.
Not terrible. But so now where is the tasting room? Just north of Kenwood?
I'm actually in Kenwood. Yep, we're right in Kenwood. I think you're actually even on the right road. I think that's Adobe Canyon Road. Yeah, I think that's it.
Oh, we have a crack staff that does a lot of research before these things. It's pretty impressive.
We're gonna have to look out the window and see if there's that yellow pin sticking in the ground out there.
Oh, it gets better.
I see it.
It gets much better. We can actually go just see everything. It's nice that today you're clothed. Last time when the satellite went over, that was a bit unexpected. But this is the tasting area. And I think it's interesting that we can go ground level.
So that's my neighbor. There's my recycling bins. Oh, we were in construction. Oh, construction. Yep.
Is this fence electric? Some of our friends would like to know. I mean, is that?
No, but we do have goon towers at the end, and we will shoot.
Shoot to kill signs. I like to see that. And this is the tasting area, yes?
Yeah, well, that's incredible. We bought the property in 2018. So what's that? It's definitely not 2021. This is completely changed. So the map that you had is very different. This is when we bought it. We started working on the place. That is the tasting room there. That's our wee bungalow, our tasting bungalow. And now the vineyard is where the mulch. You see the mulch on the other side there. That's no longer there. I actually have a Viognier vineyard there.
Oh, that was a mistake. You should have consulted me. That's a mistake. That should be a bocce ball court because we've got a lot of professional bocce ball players that are cellar angels. Unless you have a bocce ball court.
It's a shuffleboard court. Yeah,
oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
Shuffleboard is the same. I live in Florida. That's the sport of the world down here. So shuffleboard is fine. So how many rows of Viognier do you have in here?
I have. So when we moved to this property in 2018, there was he had half an acre planted, and he had Sangiovese planted, and he had 300 vines in the back area there that you can see in the back area. Back there, he had 300 vines there, but the vineyard had been damaged a little bit by the 2017 fires, which came directly through here. So they got damaged a little bit. Plus, he had the wrong rootstock on. The rootstock was extremely high vigor. The cluster sizes I was getting were the size of babies' arms, and I had watermelons instead of grapes. So I decided last year to pull the entire vineyard and also extend it. So I extended it in the front and I extended it in the back of the tasting room. So now the tasting room is like a boat that is going through a vineyard. And if you can imagine that. And I planted the entire vineyard to Viognier. And so now I've got 528 vines. And I actually went out to this very vineyard that you are tasting. I talked to the Duttons beforehand, obviously, and I asked them if I could take the budwood from this vineyard last year. And I planted rootstock last March. And then in last September, I tea-budded on Viognier. So in another 2 more vintages, I will have 0.65 acres of Viognier.
See, and let me back up a second. How many vines did you say you had?
528.
Yeah, see, that's amazing. You don't hear that from the mass production houses on how many vines they have. The limited producer, artisan winemaker knows to the number how many vines they have. That's incredible. Is this person trespassing or is that Heather?
That is Heather.
Okay, good. And this is where people taste when they get to buy a case of your wine off the Cellar Angels website for the Angel bonus offer. They sit out here and with you.
Exactly. And if I beat them at if I beat them at shuffleboard, they have to wash all the glasses.
I would consider that a little bit of home court advantage. That is awesome.
Yes, I've actually got Heather convinced now, actually, with the shuffleboard, because it's actually on a concrete pad. It was here when we came out here. Neither her nor I know how to play shuffleboard. So I've got her convinced that what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill that box with wet sand. I'm going to contour it. I'm going to drill 2 holes into the concrete. I'm going to put AstroTurf over it, and I've got myself a putting green.
I was wondering where you were going with this. I'm like, oh, putting green. That works. That works.
Putting green.
And it's not underneath a tree where you've got to blow it off and blow the debris all the time with the leaf blower.
It's next to a vineyard, so you can keep yourself ideally refreshed as you putt.
Yeah. The old aiming fluid never hurts.
Never.
So we've talked about the aromatics of Viognier, but also let's talk about kind of the rest of your portfolio, because you're really known for your Syrah, and that was your first passion. So what, same reason Syrah just caught you by surprise and you've been hooked ever since?
Well, before I mention the Syrah, I have to say that I see that Marge is on the line here, and so if she'll take instance to. In fact, I'm known for my Syrah because she loves my Sauvignon Blanc. So, hi Marge, I hope you're doing well. But yes, Syrah was my first love in the Northern Rhone. I loved the red. I don't know if you know, but in the Northern Rhone, if it's a red wine from any one of the 7 appellations in the Northern Rhone, it's 100%. It's Syrah. It doesn't have to be 100% Syrah. It can actually, in Côte Rôtie, they have the right to put a little bit of Viognier in it. In Saint-Joseph, they're allowed to put a little bit of Roussanne in it as well. And so it's actually, the vast majority, though, is 100% Syrah. And I love Syrah. I think for me, Syrah is the quintessential food wine. And again, that's the thing I love to do with wines, and that's how I accessed wines. I guess when I moved to France, was a lot of the friends that I had. They were all. I was in France, so everybody knows how to cook. I don't know. It's just inherently a skill that everybody is born with in France. I don't have the same skill set, but there's always a bottle of wine on the table. Every single meal, there's a bottle of wine, and it was fun to access the wine through the food, and then better enjoy the food with the wine. And so it was really, that's how I actually got into the whole thing originally. And so when we went down to the Northern Rhone and we started exploring Syrahs, yeah, I mean, Syrah will go from fish all the way up to barbecue ribs. I mean, it'll pair with all sorts, so many different types of foods. And that's why I love it.
And it's also extremely aromatic. And it also
Yes.
Does well, like you said, with a wide variety of foods. Is that it's acidity again coming through?
I think it is. I think it's much easier to pair a Northern Rhone style or a cool climate style of Syrah with food, again, because of the acidity, versus a warmer climate Syrah. And so if you get a Syrah, and I'm not knocking them, please don't misunderstand, but I'm not, but if you go and buy yourself a bottle of Napa Syrah or Lodi Syrah, it may be a wonderful wine, but I'm not sure how well it's going to pair with foods, because it's going to be much higher in alcohol. It's going to have much lower acidity. And so it'll be a nice porch sipper or an evening with a cigar or something out on the patio and stuff at night. But for pairing with food, those wines they're not structured, or at least it's a very generic way of saying it, but the majority are not structured in a way to go with food very easily. And so if you go to more of the cool climate style, then you're maintaining two things. You're maintaining the acidity in the wine, but you're also maintaining those higher phenolics. And the higher phenolics in Syrah come across, instead of in the Viognier, you're getting honeysuckle, you're getting jasmine, you're getting orange blossom, you're getting all those different flowers. In Syrah, you're going to get lavender, you're going to get violet, you're going to get white pepper, you're going to get those higher, prettier, more food-friendly types of notes. And they're much easier to pair with foods because you've got more. For me, it's the range of flavors that you have in the wines. It's easier to pair with the range of flavors that you have on your plate.
And it's interesting because I think you just hit it on the Syrah, but I think I would call that versatility. I mean, it is not 2 or 3 dishes with your Syrahs, and it's also not 2 or 3 dishes with this Viognier. And I apologize, I just took a bite of food on television and didn't offer anybody any food, so please forgive me. Mission Control says, show them what you are eating. So this is a Thai pork ginger dish that, because Stephen indicated that ginger and Thai and heat go very, very well with the Viognier, and also garlic. And you can't have enough garlic in our opinion. So that's always a good thing. And then the cheese is not goat cheese because I did not buy the right one. So this is a Boursin type cheese that I did pair well or try it with the Viognier, and it was really good. But I would imagine the goat cheese is fantastic. But the versatility of the Viognier, you talked about Asian dishes, you talked about curry, you talked about heat. And this is what I love about Viogniers. And when we owned the wine store years ago, we tried to get the audience and the consumers into Rhone wines because of what you just hit upon, their food friendliness. I mean, they run the gamut of food friendliness, and everyone wants to stick with the big 6 of American wines. So I applaud you for pursuing this. And I would be curious if there's, on the horizon, where do you see MacLaren going? What is your next big project? What do you want to do after you come through this vintage in 2021?
It's funny. I get that question a lot, and I was in tech for 23 years, and I chased a hockey stick growth curve for 23 years, and I don't want to do that anymore. I'm quite happy with getting to the stage where I know I can put wine on the table. As long as I can put food on the table to go with the wine and put a roof over our heads, then we're good.
So as long as no one's shouting clear and putting paddles on you, you don't necessarily need that hockey stick any longer. I get it.
I don't need that anymore. The thing I'm playing with right now is because I played with one of my friends, one of the French producers, Yves Cuirons, a dear friend, and he in 2017 asked me if I wanted to make a wine together. And Yves been a friend for, well, I've known him for probably 20 some years, ever since I was living over there. And so it was fun to do it with him. And we did a cote rôti style of Syrah together, and we co-labeled it. We got both of our names on the bottle, and we co-labeled it.
Oh, wait,
and it
back up 1 second. And what would be defined as a cote rôti style?
So a cote rôti is one of the appellations in the Northern Rhone. And depending on the vintage, they allow the producers to blend a little bit of Viognier into their Syrah.
Well,
the original genesis, I'm sorry.
Yeah, why did they do that? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
The original genesis of the idea to do that was that the Northern Rhone is actually the most northerly appellation in the Northern Rhone. It's right next to Condrieu, Châteaubriand. So it's really on the north side of the Northern Rhone. So in certain vintages in the past, not nowadays, because the planet is definitely warming up, but in the past, that appellation did struggle for ripeness. They struggled to get their Syrah to ripen because it was just so cool. And so what they did was they added a little bit of Viognier into their Syrah, and it just added that little punch, that little fruit punch, and that little lift in the wine. And so they allowed it as part of the appellation that you're allowed in cote rôti to add a little bit of Viognier. I think the maximum is 7%, but it depends. It's between 3 and 7% that you're allowed to add to the Syrah. So Yves, who makes cote rôti in cote rôti, said to me, "Hey, would you like to make a cote rôti style of Syrah?" And I said, "Hey, did I pause too long?" The answer is yes. So it was fun. It was really fun to do because he's a dear friend, and so he came over in 2018. I'd made the wines, and he came over because he consults with wineries all over the place, and this was just a friend's project. It wasn't something that there was any transactions. It was really just two friends want to get together and drink some wine and try something together. So he came over, he tasted all my Syrahs. He went, "Oh, that Bennett Valley Syrah it will be with a little bit of Viognier would be just perfect." So we took my Bennett Valley Syrah, and then we went to either end of the table and we started pipetting Viognier into the glasses to try and figure out what was our favorite blend. And then we got back together again half an hour later and he said to me, "So what did you get?" And I went, "What did you get?" And that went on for about 5 minutes. And then we eventually agreed that we both had 5% add was what we'd actually we both selected as the best add to the Syrah. And so we went with that. And so we co-labeled it, and that was it.
So you co-labeled it. So is that available?
Unfortunately, we only made 2 barrels. And I sold it exclusively through my club, and it sold out, which was unfortunate because then I gave it to one of the magazines that came to rate my wines, and she loved it and she gave it 95 points, and it was the most frustrating 95 points I've ever had because I had to keep explaining to people, "I'm sorry, I don't have any."
Yeah.
So
Note to self, don't share anything with the critics that is only 2 barrels.
So I called up Yves after we got the mark, and I said, "Hey Yves, you'll never guess." And he says, "Well, you know what that means." I said, "Uh-huh." He goes, "Yep, we're going to have to make more of that." So we'll do more of that in the future. So it'll be kind of fun to play with. And I'm also going to play with a Roussanne Syrah blend this year too, which is more of a Saint-Joseph style. So it's going to be
Is there a shelf life on blending experimentation that is finite? For example, the Angels were out in the Valley in August and we missed you. And Mr. Brewbreaker was with us. And if we were to actually come out again in December, January, February, whatever, do you have the components to just say, okay, here is the Bennett Valley in bottle here, where you could mix and match and we could be the mad scientist and get a flavor, pun intended, a sense of actually what that blending process is like?
Yeah, that'd be fun, actually. Yeah, we could. I mean, it would be different in the sense that I no longer have the 2017 vintage of Viognier. It's the 2020, it'll be 2021 or 2020. And the thing, but yeah, I mean, it's so much fun to do. It really is. It's incredible. The thing that blew me away, and I think it would blow if we were sitting down doing it, is how little Viognier you have to add to the Syrah for there to be an impact. is incredibly, it's just amazing. I mean, it's literally 1 or 2% you add and you go, wow, okay. I mean, you've got a whole glass or a whole vial full of Syrah and a pipette of Viognier. You think, why am I even wasting my time putting this little amount of Viognier in there? And then you taste it and you go, bloody hell. Well, at least I do, because that's a Scottish thing, but possibly you would have your own expression. But yeah, you just go, blinking heck. I mean, it's incredible. And so you can get very close to the point where, and for me, the important thing, and the reason I kind of focused on the 5% was it still tasted to me like a Syrah. Whereas if you went a little bit more with a Viognier.
That's what I was going to ask that one.
Yeah. You start to get to the point where you're going, well, it's nice, but what is it? You know?
It's like a gin and tonic. You have to just be careful on that gin, because otherwise it's trouble.
Yes, very good. And it's actually interesting too. I don't know if you know, but there's an enzyme in the Viognier that when you add to Syrah, it darkens the Syrah. So it's counterintuitive. You think adding white wine to red wine, you're going to make rosé. But it's actually, there's an enzyme in the Viognier that when you add it to the Syrah, it darkens it. So when you have the two glasses side by side, the base Syrah that we used and the one that we actually added the small 5% to, it's just very slightly darker, which is actually kind of fun.
No, that is absolutely really cool, because you're right. You would never anticipate that. But also when you're doing it, you would think it would get lighter, and actually probably lighter, more floral, more perfumey in taste, and have the color be darker is fascinating. I mean, that is fantastic. So we can all come out and blend. We can play shuffleboard. I mean, that sounds like an afternoon.
Oh, it sounds like a couple of days.
It does sound like a couple of days. It does. I mean, the cottage behind me is that's where the magic happens in the blending, and it's essentially fantastic that you be able to come here, produce such great wines in very, very small quantities. By the way, what is total case production?
Well, I normally say between 12 and 1,500 cases, but based on last year, now I have to say between 100 and 1,500 cases. Because last year I made 100 cases.
The accountants in the crowd are going, no, that's too wide a variance. You have to narrow it down a little bit more.
This year I'm going to make about 1,400 cases.
Okay, 1,400. And do you want to stay there? Do you want to get larger? Or is this part of the plan where you're like, I don't want that hockey stick of growth. I want just...
I think I can get a little bit bigger. The point I want to do, Martin, is I never want to get to the point where I can't make the wine myself, because I don't ever want to get to the point where I'm kind of the consultant winemaker or the guy that's basically writing up the work orders and sending them into the team. Because to be honest with you, to be absolutely 100% frank, not that this isn't fun, because I totally enjoy this. My favorite part of making wine is making wine. I love it. I love being in the vineyards, but I love making the wine. I love the nose, the smells, I love the whole process. So I never want to get to a point where I'm too big, where it gets too much production. And so I'm just kind of trying to grow organically. I think that physically I could get probably up to about 2,000 cases myself. I think I could do that just myself. There is a physical limit because it is quite tiring, and I punch down manually, and these guns don't come for free.
Well, we had an Olympic swimmer on the broadcast a week ago, and that is her favorite act of winemaking. She actually uses her arms to swim through the punch down.
I've often thought when I'm actually punching down and when we're doing other things in the winery, I've thought, man, I should put this on a video and we should start the winemaker workout.
There you go.
I think it could go viral.
This at-home thing isn't going anywhere. So you've got the Steve Law Peloton wine workout video coming up. I'm sure that will be a huge hit. Well, listen, kids, as they say, those harbor lights are coming into view. I want to thank Steve Law and sharing with us a fantastic evening of MacLaren and the Aida Viognier. Did we discuss how all your wines are named?
No, I name all of my Syrahs after the vineyard names. And then I name all of my other wines. I make a Sauvignon Blanc, a Viognier, and a Pinot Noir They are the only other varietals I make in addition to my Syrah. And I only make one of each. And I name them after the ladies in my life. So it started with my mum. She loves Sauvignon Blanc. So I named my Sauvignon Blanc Lise because my name is Lee. My mother-in-law is Aida. And my wife, who let me do this and still is teaching to pay the mortgage or to pay for the food that's going on the table. I can put the wine, she puts the food. It's a nice bit. It's a great partnership. She's called Heather and she loves her Pinot. So I make her a Pinot every year.
I love it. It's fantastic. I'm so glad to catch up with you again. Thank you for spending some time with us during harvest. I know this is the crazy time of year. And for those of you, next week we have Steve and I'm sorry, not Steve Law. We have Ross and Jennifer Halleck. First time on the program with Halleck Vineyard. They actually produced a Pinot Noir from not too far away from where Steve is. And their first vintage of Pinot Noir was actually ranked #1 Pinot Noir in the world. So it is an impressive small little acreage of property. We're going to be interviewing them next week on the food and wine pairing education for holiday foods. So what is going to go well on the holiday table? Because I know it's scary. Those things are fast approaching. So everyone stay safe, be good to one another. Have a fantastic weekend. Thank you so much for tuning in. Steve Law, best to you and